Welcome back to Polygamy, An Enemy Has Done This. Today I'm going to be talking about marriage and polygamy using the template of creation, both the scriptural record and our physical bodies. I want to introduce today's topic by giving you some background about my own journey trying to understand polygamy. I'm a lifelong faithful member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I'm also one of those women who sadly was always haunted by our doctrine of many wives and concubines. Ever since hearing about it as a child, I was unable to make peace with what polygamy communicated to me about my future in God's kingdom. And not just my future, but the lived experience and eternity of my sisters like Hagar, Leah, Emma Smith. I mean, polygamy made it seem like women would eternally be worth less than men. To me, the math seemed really basic. If A equals B plus B, then B is worth less than A. Of course, that's not what we teach. We teach the scriptures that all are alike to God and that women are worth the same as men. But then we also have a lot of statements from church leaders in the 19th century and some of the wives themselves that stridently testify of the divinity of polygamy. And for decades, the hardest part for me about these statements and testimonies was what they testified of. The church leaders and the women from our polygamous era did not say God commanded them to live polygamy to have a lot of children. They said and taught that polygamy was essential for exaltation and that it was the only religion practiced in heaven. Children were a byproduct, but that was not why they did it. So you know that I'm not exaggerating here and that this is a legitimate wrestle, and unfortunately is often why people leave the church. Here's a helpful example to show how foundational this teaching was. I'm going to read the beginning of a letter, which I'm linking in the show notes, to President Benjamin Harrison from the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. To the President of the United States, we, the First Presidency and Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, beg to respectfully represent to Your Excellency the following facts. We formerly taught to our people that polygamy, or celestial marriage, as commanded by God through Joseph Smith, was right, that it was a necessity to man's highest exaltation in the life to come. That doctrine was publicly promulgated by our president, the late Brigham Young, 40 years ago, and was steadily taught and impressed upon the Latter-day Saints up to September 1890. The letter goes on to ask for amnesty for people who are in these polygamous marriages because they were being persecuted and prosecuted for breaking the law. So that's our entire priesthood leadership, the highest governing body of the church, openly acknowledging that since the time of Brigham Young, they have taught and impressed upon the Latter-day Saints that being polygamous was necessary to obtain the highest degree of the celestial kingdom. And now, of course, we say polygamy is not necessary to obtain the highest degree of the celestial kingdom. And plenty of people don't worry about it. But as a girl and then a woman who really struggled with polygamy, I couldn't just not worry about this discrepancy. I really needed to know, do our current beliefs mean that all those leaders and women were just wrong? Because if they weren't wrong, then we're wrong now. But if they were wrong, just how wrong were they? And how could I know? I'm a nobody. I think at this point, a lot of us just put it on the shelf to deal with later, and I totally get that and did that multiple times myself. But not long after President Nelson gave his talk, A Plea to My Sisters, I decided to take polygamy off my shelf. I felt encouraged by President Nelson's belief that covenant-keeping women had the ability to detect deception and, by implication, identify truth. So this question actually became the seed of faith for me. How could I know what was true about polygamy and concubinage? Because the scriptures tell us the doctrine of many wives and concubines is a package deal. I thought to myself, what if I were God And I knew that despite my best efforts, people would teach each other contradictory things in my name. How could I communicate to my children unfiltered, short of coming down and rending the veil? Yes, God communicates through the Spirit, but for the polygamy issue, everybody in their contradictory statements is proclaiming that they're speaking by the Spirit. They're both saying, "Thus saith the Lord." And I couldn't quite understand what the Spirit was whispering to me about which of these two groups, polygamy is essential, polygamy is not essential. I couldn't understand which of these two groups was right. It was at this point that I started to think about the creation. Not just the creation record that we have in the scriptures of Adam and Eve, but also our literal flesh, the creation that we are as humans. And so today I'm talking about these two independent witnesses of God's law of marriage. The witness we can see in the scriptural record of the creation and the witness of our flesh. To me, creation witnesses have become the most obvious and authoritative witnesses of truth because these are the things God has done. These are God's works, and they can't be altered like words. They can be misinterpreted though, so I certainly pray that I don't misinterpret our bodily symbols or the scriptures in this discussion. Okay, so first let's look at the scriptural record of the creation and how it defines marriage. And right at the start, I want to point out a real advantage that the Latter-day Saints have. The Judeo-Christian world uses one scriptural account of the creation, the book of Genesis, but we have three. We use Genesis and the books of Abraham and Moses that are in the Pearl of Great Price. And I think that that's a gift that as Latter-day Saints we've been given. And it gives us this amazing opportunity to discern truth from the creation. Now, Genesis and Moses tell the creation in two parts. First, in a general overview of days, and then second, in more of a play-by-play of humanity's creation and the events in the Garden of Eden. So let's look at the first account of the creation, the overview. Right off the bat, we see that we are created in the image of God, male and female. By creating one man and one woman, then, God's works demonstrate that the likeness of God is equally male and female. The scriptures in Genesis 1 are simple and short, but they tell us everything. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Don't let God's he pronoun throw you off, because there's a lot of baggage over thousands of years around which pronoun gets applied when translating the Hebrew Elohim, which is a plural. Just look at what the words communicate. The work of creation is one to one. A male and a female together are the image of God. And of course, this is our doctrine in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that God ordained marriage to be between a man and a woman. Okay, still in the first account of the creation, after Adam and Eve are created, they are then blessed and told to be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. In the beginning, there were only two humans, one male and one female, who were commanded to populate the entire world. God designed it this way. And the scriptures tell us that God found this one-to-one ratio to be very good. So right off the bat, creation witnesses that monogamy is marriage. God's work in ordaining marriage between one man and one woman and commanding those two to multiply and replenish the earth is a very clear scriptural witness that God does not command men to have sex with multiple women in order to ensure that many children are born. Now let's look a little closer at the purpose of marriage, why marriage exists according to Scripture. In the second play-by-play account of the creation, we see that the purpose of marriage is for man to not be alone. And before any woman watching feels second-class status, remember, the scriptures have framed the male-female dynamic to be the image of God. So man alone is not the image and likeness of God. Man is not God. A man must be equally yoked to a woman to be in God's image. Let's look at this from another angle. In Genesis and Moses, and Abraham has a difference that we'll talk about in a second, but in Genesis and Moses, one of the events that takes place before Eve is created is what is referred to as Adam naming the animals. Many people interpret this in the literal sense, that Adam called that creature an antelope and that one a zebra. But I think we should consider that what Adam is actually doing is acting as a witness of the creation itself. That animal is comprised of male and female. And notice in creation scriptures, every time the ratio of male to female is 1:1. Therefore, that is a whole animal, which can now perpetuate itself. Check. So Adam is not naming animals so much as he is verifying that every form of life is complete. And that completion, that oneness, is manifested through the continuation of life. I think the book of Abraham really supports this interpretation. In Abraham, the naming of animals takes place after Eve's creation. And listen to how it's described. And Adam gave names to all cattle, to the fowl of the air, to every beast of the field. And for Adam, there was found an help meet for him. So humanity is now whole. And with Eve, there are now 2 earthly witnesses that every form of life is complete. The creation is finished. So now let's talk about the creation of Eve from Adam's rib. Specifically, let's layer on our Latter-day Saint interpretation, what we understand the rib to symbolize. I'm going to quote then Elder Nelson for this. The rib signifies neither dominion nor subservience, but a lateral relationship as partners to work and to live side by side. This is really driven home with the language. Eve is a help meet for Adam. She's not a helpmeet. She's a help meet for the man. The Hebrew words which make up help meet for are azer kenegdo, and the concepts these words communicate are really beautiful. In brief, they connote the kind of rescuing help God gives, the help of salvation, and they communicate that this particular help has an opposite or counterpart quality to it. This azer kenegdo, this help meet for, tells us that women bring something to humanity that allows men to be saved. And men bring something to humanity that allows women to be saved. Both the woman and the man need the atoning sacrifice of Jesus Christ to be made whole. So when we talk about Christ as the cornerstone, he is the cornerstone of humanity. Christ is that adjoining base between 2 walls of power. Man, woman, joined by Christ, become whole and in God's likeness. So even if we are still attempting to understand the foundational, absolute, eternal equality of the woman to the man in the structures that we've set up in this fallen world, God comprehends it. God created us to be equals. Valerie Hudson gave an amazing talk on this concept of help meet for, called The 2 Trees. Well, actually, it's an article that she then presented as a talk at a fair conference. I'm going to link to both of those in the show notes because I think it's a wonderful discourse on men and women's complementary responsibilities in the plan of salvation, and I highly recommend it. And just as something to consider when we think about this concept of azer kenegdo, I'm showing a picture of a placenta because it is incredible how much it looks like the tree of life. And the fact that every single one of us has to receive nourishment from it to live and be born, I don't think that that's accidental symbolism, and it can really help us understand our equal stewardships. Okay, so let's continue with the creation story and the purpose of marriage. Adam understands that he is to leave his father and his mother And here we might note, which father and mother would Adam be leaving? To me, this is clear scriptural evidence of a father and mother in heaven. So Adam leaves them with the understanding that he is to cleave to his wife, to be one flesh. Cleaving as one flesh is literally accomplished through sexual intercourse, but it goes way beyond just sex. When he was president of BYU, now Elder Holland talked about this in his well-known devotional of souls, symbols, and sacraments. I'd like to share just a small part of that talk, which wonderfully explains the symbolism of sexual intimacy. Human intimacy, that sacred physical union ordained of God for a married couple, deals with a symbol that demands special sanctity. Such an act of love between a man and a woman is, or certainly was ordained to be, a symbol of total union of their hearts, their hopes, their lives, their love, their family, their future, their everything. And the external symbol of that union, the physical manifestation of what is a far deeper spiritual and metaphysical bonding, is the physical blending that is part of, indeed, a most beautiful and gratifying expression of, that larger, more complete union of eternal purpose and promise. I always chuckle a little at this because by the end it's like, I think he's talking about sex, but I'm not totally sure anymore. But I hope you're able to get what he was saying, that sexual intercourse is a symbol. By itself, it's a biological act of oneness, but it also symbolizes a life of oneness between a husband and a wife. The purpose of marriage is oneness, that wholeness that we achieve through the unity of masculine and feminine. And it's not just a symbol of oneness between a husband and wife. It's another witness of the nature of God, the Elohim that said a male and a female was in God's likeness and image. I'll let Elder Holland explain this. I submit to you that you will never be more like God at any other time in this life than when you are expressing that particular power. This is so clear, and it's our doctrine, but we still haven't embraced it, joyfully celebrated it. God is an exalted man and an exalted woman, our father and mother, who cleave as one God for the salvation of their children as provided through the atoning sacrifice of their only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. That's our doctrine. Trying to reconcile this doctrine with the idea that polygamy exists beyond the veil, it's no wonder we frankly have massive confusion, not just over marriage, but over who women are in this life and the next. So now we've drifted into the physical witness of creation, which is the divine design of our bodies. And this is where we get into the other really clear witness that polygamy is not part of God's law of marriage. Like, it's not even an option. It's our biology. Men have been created with one penis, women with one vagina. If men had been created with 2, 3, or 55 penises, then you could say that polygamy is an option within the law of marriage, because a man could literally cleave to 2, 3, or 55 women. But they can't. Men may choose to cleave to one woman, then leave her to go cleave to another, then leave her to go cleave to another, and so forth, producing children all along the way. But here's the thing, so can women. This business of multiple sexual partners, that's not oneness. And oneness is the purpose of marriage. So the divine design of our physical bodies bears witness of the wholeness which can only be achieved through the equality of the sexes. Our biological design also tells us something about how God intends for women to experience sexual pleasure. A man's penis is multi-use, and so this design inextricably ties his sexual satisfaction to fertility. Every time a man sexually climaxes, he creates the possibility of a child. But women's reproductive anatomy is different. Our bodies have an organ which exists to provide sexual satisfaction and fulfillment outside of pregnancy, the clitoris. The clitoris is not necessary for pregnancy. Because of this organ, a woman may reach sexual climax multiple times, in fact, without a prolonged rest and recovery phase. And she will never have any chance of becoming pregnant with a child. It's impossible. Unless a man reaches sexual climax while his penis is inside her vagina. If you haven't heard of it, I want to give a shout out to Gabrielle Blair's book, Ejaculate Responsibly, which really makes the case for us to reframe our discussion about abortion around this fact about male sperm, that it's male sperm that is responsible for 100% of unwanted pregnancies. To me, the divine design of women's reproductive system witnesses that God intends for women to experience sexual satisfaction, and that our sexual enjoyment and satisfaction is not tied to procreation. So now we have to ask, does it serve a woman's sexual satisfaction and enjoyment if her husband is having sexual intercourse with another woman or women? No. Besides the obvious fact that polygamy and concubinage diminish a husband's ability to sexually satisfy his wife, because men do require a rest and recovery phase, a polygamous husband's fragmented sexual encounters actually harm his wife's ability to experience sexual pleasure. That's because the clitoris is not a woman's most powerful sexual organ. That designation goes to her brain. Married women who feel cherished, loved in that oneness sense that the total union of sex is meant to symbolize, they're the ones who experience the greatest sexual pleasure. Every few years, a study comes out showing, to the shock and confusion of the secular world, that monogamously married women, usually religious women, are the ones who experience the greatest sexual pleasure of all the female groups measured. Women's sexual pleasure is directly tied to fidelity from their partners. So, can you see what polygamy does to a woman's mind and to her enjoyment of sex? If a woman knows her husband is having sex with another woman or women, something inside her shuts down. When I read some of the quotes by my polygamous foremothers, my heart aches at what their words communicate. Here's just one example, a pretty well-known quote by Zina Huntington Young from an interview with Brigham Young's wives that was published in 1869 in The World, a New York newspaper. And this quote is really just the tip of the iceberg in this interview, which is partially available online, and I'll link it in the show notes. Sister Young said, "It is the duty of a first wife to regard her husband not with a selfish devotion. She must regard her husband with indifference, and with no other feeling than that of reverence. For love we regard as a false sentiment, a feeling which should have no existence in polygamy." I mean, this is tragic and wrong. Love isn't a false sentiment. Love is the motivating source of our existence. If the women who lived in polygamy were able to cope by believing that they had to hold love at bay somehow, you can imagine what that did to their sexual satisfaction in marriage and their overall mental health. You don't even have to imagine. The women themselves testified that they didn't enjoy sex. Romania Pratt Penrose in 1886 said that assertions that Mormons were polygamous for sensual motives were not true. "It is self-evident," Sister Penrose declared, "that it is not the case with women." And that really brings us to how the doctrine of polygamy and concubinage affects women in the church today. I mean, think about it. What does it do to the mind and sexual satisfaction of a woman in the church today when she considers that her beloved husband may someday be commanded or even just desire. Because we know from section 132, verses 61 and 62, that the trigger for the law of many wives and concubines is actually a man's desire. What does it do to her to know that someday her husband may desire to have sex with other women and that God will justify that? What does it do to her mind and sexual satisfaction in marriage when she considers that this oneness of marriage, whatever that looks like eternally, may be something her husband has to divide among multiple women? Despair, depression, sexual dysfunction, that's the sort of havoc the doctrine of polygamy wreaks upon some percentage of women in the church today. Throughout the course of human history, people have believed all sorts of things are godly. To paraphrase Elder Holland, except in the case of Jesus Christ, imperfect people are all God has ever had to work with. That must be terribly frustrating, but God deals with it. How do you think God deals with the fact that we are all imperfect people, that we can all misunderstand God's laws? To me, it's clear that one of the witnesses God uses to teach us truth is creation. In the Book of Mormon, when the Antichrist Korihor ends up before Alma and the chief judge, Alma calls upon creation as one of the witnesses to the existence of God. Quote, "The scriptures are laid before thee, yea, and all things denote there is a God. Yea, even the earth, and all things that are upon the face of it, yea, and its motion, yea, and also all the planets which move in their regular form, do witness that there is a supreme creator." Life, this existence, testifies of God. So marriage between one man and one woman actually is one of the simplest laws of God to comprehend, because it is the law by which life itself is created. That which creates life is of God, period. Our divinely designed anatomy actually forbids us to create life with anything more than one man and one woman. Okay, so today I've talked about two of the independent witnesses that creation gives us of the law of marriage: the scriptural record that details marriage as God ordains it, and our physical bodies. Creation scriptures witness that Elohim is equally male and female. God does not require polygamy to multiply and replenish the earth. The ratio of one man to one woman is very good. Man and woman are absolute equals. Our flesh witnesses that any numerical combination other than one man and one woman is forbidden. Women's sexual enjoyment and satisfaction is divinely ordained. Women's sexual fulfillment is tied to men's fidelity. Thanks for watching. Next time, we'll discuss what our Latter-day Saint scriptures teach us about the one who planted the seed of polygamy. Have a great day. And remember, when we talk about polygamy, there's only one question that really matters. Is it wheat or is it a tare? It can't be both.